from beyond the arc.
It's a using trophy. Oh my God. LeBron now trying to bully his way in, and LeBron aggressive has yet another layup, 6-point Laker lead. Count it. All right, LeBron. LeBron from the outside. Ring it up for the King. Baseline. The first layup is good and one. LeBron going downhill. Scores with the left hand. LeBron just get to the basket like he has his entire career.
This guy's never going to stop, is he? LeBron James in year 21 is averaging an insane and unheard of 25 points per game, completely redefining the standard of longevity in the NBA. The man has averaged 25 plus points a game for 20 straight seasons and is closing in on 40,000 career points. With all that being said, I think there comes a point where the sheer volume of scoring that LeBron James has done in his long NBA career is just so overwhelming that we have no other option but to call him the greatest scorer of all time. Disregarding all the GOAT debates and all-time rankings, how much more of this high-level scoring do we need to see from LeBron James to rightfully crown him the GOAT of getting buckets? Or is he already past this point, having already claimed that prestigious title? Or are all these extra years of stuffing the stat sheet really just a waste of energy, and there's almost nothing he can do at this point to surpass some of the greatest scorers the league has ever seen? In today's video, we're going to break down who's the greatest scorer of all time. And if any of you OG fans remember, I actually made a video quite similar to this one. And that video, for my subscriber count of around 800 at the time, did phenomenal, racking in about 50,000 views. During that video, I broke down all of the different facets of scoring the basketball and came up with the greatest scorers of all time list. But I want to make an updated video on this topic. During nearly a year gap in between that video, there's been a lot that's changed in the NBA. Like I mentioned, LeBron continues to keep piling on the points, almost at 40,000. Solidified bucket getters like Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, DeMar DeRozan, Chris Paul, and James Harden are all clawing their way towards the top of the points leaderboard. And we have other young offensive phenoms like Luka Doncic, Giannis, Jason Tatum, Joel Embiid, Devin Booker, and more, all continuing to score the ball at a historic level. So what we're going to do now is look at the various aspects and metrics of scoring the ball to find out who's the greatest scorer of all time. We're going to look at both current and retired players here. And what better spot to start than the points total leaderboard. And to no one's surprise here, LeBron James is leading this chart. The gap in between him and the second place Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is only growing larger as the days continue. Karl Malone places third at a hair under 37,000 points, followed by Kobe and Mike at the fourth and fifth places around 33 and 32,000 points. And players like Dirk, Wilt, Shaq, Melo, and Moses Malone all make up the top 10. Now, using the point totals to determine who's the greatest scorer of all time, I mean, it's nice, but you can't just blindly pick the greatest scorer just off of this list. You see, the points total doesn't truly show who's the greatest scorer ever. It shows which player has been the best at scoring the ball for a really, really long time, not necessarily who's the best at the skill of scoring. When we look at points per game, it helps to balance off the two. Michael Jordan takes the crown here, averaging 30.1 points a game, the highest of any player ever, only slightly higher than Wilt Chamberlain at number 2. To my surprise, Joel Embiid has the third highest points per game of all players. While the points total list only features one current player in LeBron James, the points per game list features 3 current players, Embiid, LeBron, and KD. But just like the points total list isn't perfect, neither is the points per game. While the points total list favors players that have willingly played for as many years as humanly possible, the points per game list is just the opposite. It favors players who haven't played for as many years, so either A, current players who haven't finished their whole career yet and haven't gone through those final years of their career where their production significantly drops. So Joel Embiid is a good example of this. Or B, players who cut their career length shorter than it could have been. Michael Jordan is a great example here with 3 total retirements. But let me ask you something. Do you know when the real all-time great bucket getters were made? Yeah, in the playoffs. Let's take a look at playoff scoring totals and averages. In terms of total points, I think it's pretty obvious as to who wins this. Yup, we all saw it coming, LeBron. LeBron James clearly dominates the point totals, leading by 2,000 more than the next highest player, which is MJ. And the rest of the list is pretty much what you'd expect it to look like. Some of the game's all-time greats leading this list. But the playoff point averages are quite the opposite story. On this list, we have not one, Not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, but 6 current players that make up the top 7 playoff scorers by average. Luka Doncic at 2, KD at 4, LeBron James at 6, D-Book at 7, D-Mitch at 8, and Nikola Jokic at 9. Absolutely crazy. But what's really crazy is what MJ was doing in the playoffs. Bro, 33.5 points is unreal. But how about we look at this question from another angle? Instead of just looking at totals and averages, how about we look at how many times a player was objectively the best scorer in the league throughout their career? So scoring titles. And Michael Jordan and Wilt Chamberlain absolutely dominate this list. AI, KD, and George Gervin all tie at 3rd place with 4 scoring titles. Harden, Neil Johnston, and George Mikan all tie at 4th place. And there's a bunch of players that tie with 2 scoring titles. Now, as great as these 5 basic categories of measuring scoring are, you guys already knew about this. This isn't anything new for NBA fans. The discussion goes so much deeper than this. The relationship between a player's prime scoring days and the longevity which they maintain those offensive numbers is a very intricate relationship that shows a lot about who's the greatest scorer of all time. Of course, this applies to all topics in basketball, not just scoring, but I want to dive deeper into this topic of scoring prime versus scoring longevity, because although we can somewhat measure this through the point averages and point totals, I think it's more complex than just that. Let's first take a look at the greatest scoring primes we've ever seen. I'll show you an example of Wilt Chamberlain, who also happens to be the best in this category. Of a player's years and even decades in the league, I'm going to narrow down a player's prime into their 5 best consecutive years in the league. So for Wilt Chamberlain, these 5 years were actually his first 5 years in the league. Of those 5 years, we're going to take the combined average. So Wilt would have a peak scoring average of 41.62 points a game. Pretty simple, right? Of the hundreds and even thousands of good scorers we've seen in the league, the best 10 primes of all time look like this. Wilt Chamberlain, Michael Jordan, Elgin Baylor, James Harden, Rick Barry, Oscar Robertson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Adrian Dantley, George Gervin, and Jerry West. When looking at the 10 best scoring primes of all time on a line chart, this is what it looks like. This looks like a bunch of candy worms spilled out of its package. Let's really break down this mess. Wilt Chamberlain, like we mentioned, has by far the most impressive prime years. The 5 years shown on the screen right now are 5 of the 6 highest scoring seasons of all time. MJ's 1987 season is 4th all time and the only season in Wilt's ballpark. Speaking of MJ, he's our number 2 spot. Michael Jordan in 1987, I believe, is the single greatest scoring season of all time, which I'll talk about later in this video. For the era and circumstances MJ had, it makes his prime even more impressive. Rick Barry, in my opinion, has the most interesting route on here. He literally missed a key season of his prime in 1968 because of legal disputes between the NBA and ABA. So his prime is split. James Harden is the youngest player to appear on this list, having the 2nd highest scoring season of all time in 2019, disregarding Wilt Chamberlain's seasons. James Harden's glory days with the Rockets have honestly become underrated by fans today, but not as underrated as the 2 gentlemen we're going to talk about right now, George Gervin and Adrian Dantley, 2 historically elite scoring wings who don't get talked about enough. You could even say that Michael Jordan took aspects of their scoring bag. But how about we take a look at this from a completely opposite perspective? How about, instead of looking at players who had the highest scoring ceiling, we look at players who were able to maintain their offensive brilliance for the longest. Did you know that LeBron James has the most amount of seasons where he averaged 15 plus points a game with a staggering 21 seasons? Did you know he also had the most seasons averaging 16 plus points a game, and 17, and so on, all the way down until 27 plus points a game for the most seasons with 12. It's only until 28 plus to 30 plus where Michael Jordan has the most number of seasons. But let's look at this more specifically, more down to the fine details. How about we look at this in terms of games played with a certain point total in mind? Will that really change anything? Or is this just going to be another category that LeBron dominates? Well, you might be surprised. In terms of 20 plus point games of all time, LeBron last season broke this record, passing up Karl Malone for the highest record. LeBron also holds the record for the most amount of 25-plus point games in NBA history, beating Kareem Abdul-Jabbar at the number 2 spot with more than 100 games over him. But 30-point games is where things really start to shift. Michael Jordan, at the time of this recording, leads the NBA with the most 30-plus point games, but certainly not for long. Once we look at the 40-plus point games, the tide really starts to change. Wilt Chamberlain absolutely dominates here, having almost 100 more 40-plus point games than Michael Jordan at number 2. But if you thought that was lopsided, just wait until you see 50-plus point games. Wilt Chamberlain towers over the competition. I mean, he literally averaged this for a season. He has more 50-plus point games than Michael Jordan, Kobe, Harden, Elgin Baylor, and Damian Lillard combined, the next 5 closest competitors. And Wilt Chamberlain also has the most 60-plus point games. Definitely wasn't expecting that one. Diving deeper into these super high scoring single game performances, right here we have the top 50 highest scoring games of all time by a single player, ordered from oldest to youngest. And it's pretty obvious to see here that Wilt Chamberlain overwhelmingly dominates here, having 23 of the 50 highest individual games of all time. The next highest player is Kobe with a desolate 4 appearances compared to Wilt. Looking more recently, we're really starting to see more all-time great scoring performances happen. We've seen 3 top 26 ranked games in the last year and 2 top 8 ranked games. Now, after seeing some of the recent visuals, you might ask yourself, if Wilt Chamberlain clearly has the highest scoring prime, he clearly wipes the competition with big scoring nights, how wouldn't this guy be the greatest scorer of all time? Well, stay tuned, because in the next part of this video, we're going to really put Wilt's godlike offensive production into perspective. 25 points a game is a very respected number in the world of NBA scoring. It's pretty safe to say that if you're averaging this number or higher in a season, you are one of the league's premier bucket getters. But 25 points hasn't held the exact value throughout the history of the NBA. Throughout the timeline of basketball, the value of points has fluctuated up and down. This chart right here shows the value of 25 points a game from the years 1960 all the way to the left to the year 2023, the current day. The value of scoring 25 points was at its highest point in the early to mid 60s, around this point. So the equivalent of scoring 25 points in today's game is like scoring 32.2 points a game in 1961, meaning that scoring big was the easiest around this time. It dipped at its lowest point around the mid to late 90s and around the early 2000s. In 1999, the equivalent of scoring 25 points a game in today's game dropped as low as 22.5 points. So this era of basketball was the hardest to score big in. And you may be asking yourself, what causes these fluctuations in scoring? Well, it's all about the pace of play. Because of various influences that change the style of the game, like rule changes, officiating, trends in play style, and more, different eras have different paces of play. And as you can imagine, this heavily affects how much or little a player scores. So to counteract these fluctuations in pace of play, the NBA had a genius idea of creating something called per 100 possession statistics. Per 100 stats, like the name suggests, calculates player stats as if they played a standard 100 possessions. And on top of that, the stat also assumes everyone plays a full 48 minutes. So it really balances out the differences in pace of play in minutes, creating a very balanced and objective way to compare players of different eras. Despite me giving all of the praise to Wilt Chamberlain in the previous section of this video, this one single concept really destroys any chance of him being the greatest scorer of all time. Because not only did this man literally average more minutes than there are in a game the season he averaged 50, but he also played by far in the highest paced era of basketball, which really inflates his scoring numbers. Because this is what Wilt's numbers really look like. Nowhere near what they were in the 60s. So based off this metric, which players do score the most? Throughout NBA history, an individual scoring 40 points a season per 100 possessions has proven to be a historic scoring season. Throughout the league's 77 years of play, including this season, we've seen 49 individuals have a season average of 40 plus points per 100. And this is who these 49 players are. As you can see, a bunch of the league's greatest scorers ever make an appearance on this prestigious list. But what separates a season from historic to a once-in-a-generation feat of offense is averaging 45 points a game per 100. And we've seen 7 individual seasons where this has happened. Michael Jordan in 1987, Kobe Bryant in 2006, James Harden in 2019, Giannis in 2023, and Joel Embiid has done this for 3 straight years in a row. Absolutely insane. But looking back at this chart normally, something you can really notice quite easily is how many of these 49 seasons have taken place recently. To show a color-coded version of this, the 2020s decade in pink makes up 19 of the 49 spots, so 39%, and every other decade falls behind. The next closest decade to the 2020s is the 90s thanks to Michael Jordan, and the 2010s decade. The 1960s and 70s decade only combined for one measly season, and it was Wilt Chamberlain in 1962, his 50-point per game season. The 2020s has seen an offensive boom that no other era has even came close to. The amount of offense we're used to seeing in today's game quite literally isn't normal. In terms of the individuals who've had the most appearances on this list, well, that would be none other than Michael Jordan, with an astonishing 9 features. The next highest is a 3-way tie between Giannis, Luka, and Embiid, all with 4 features. But what about players that average the highest points per 100 possessions for their career? Having some all-time seasons is nice, but who did it for their whole career? Well, some of the top scorers might really surprise you. This is what the top 10 scorers per 100 possessions look like. Out of everyone in NBA history, Joel Embiid is the highest scorer on average. Of the top 10, 6 of these players are current: Embiid, Doncic, Durant, LeBron, Curry, and Harden. I guess we'll just have to wait and see if Embiid and Luka can both sustain their numbers into their later years to stay afloat of MJ. It really makes sense. In an era of players, coaches, and organizations looking out for players' health more than ever, it decreases the amount of minutes they have to play on a regular season basis, combined with the more conservative pace of play historically compared. It's the perfect recipe for current players to crack this list. But we're not done just yet. I'm pretty sure if you gave about 75% of the players in the league 40 shots a game, they could find a way to put up about 30 points a night. I mean, it might not be the prettiest, but I'm pretty certain in a league as talented as the NBA, most players could get it done. About 95% would severely hurt their team's chances of winning in the process, but I'm sure they could get it done. My point being that efficiency matters. Right here, we have the true shooting percentage of the top 10 per 100 possession scorers of all time, right next to their scoring numbers. But what if, just what if, we found the perfect scoring values for every NBA legend? The true scoring representative that accounts for all aspects of scoring like pace of play, minutes, efficiency, and scoring volume. Would this not be the best way to judge a player's scoring capabilities against one another? To really find who has that highest true scoring value, you need everything. When looking at some of the most efficient scorers ever, you're honestly kind of underwhelmed. I mean, come on. Rudy Gobert, DeAndre Jordan, Tyson Chandler, Clint Capella. I mean, not bad players, but they're not who you think of when you think of the greatest scorer of all time. But when you combine points per 100 possession multiplied by true shooting percentage, your greatest bucket getters list turns into this. Joel Embiid once again takes a notable advantage over the rest of the competition, winning by more than 2 points than the next highest player. It's really interesting how once again, the new players of the game overwhelmingly dominate this list, having 8 of the top 10 spots, only not having Jordan and Shaq. With all of these young players still in their primes, getting a lot of points on the daily, we'll just have to wait and see if they can sustain their averages once they retire. I think at this point we've found enough scoring data to truly rank these players against each other, so let's do just that. So it's about time that we rank each player against each other. But instead of doing this the good old-fashioned way, like placing one player after another in chronological order, we're going to rank these all-time offensive greats in a pyramid style. Now, I'm sure most of you guys know how a pyramid style ranking works, but for those who don't, each tier level represents a certain level of competence and a skill. So players in the same tier level are roughly around the same skill level as each other. The higher you go up the pyramid, the better the players get. So anyways, to start us off here, we're gonna go over the lowest tier of this pyramid, which is the honorable mentions. And I'm calling them the honorable mentions and not just tier 5 for a reason. The players that make up this list are Devin Booker, Donovan Mitchell, Nikola Jokic, Damian Lillard, Luka Doncic, Jason Tatum, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Joel Embiid. I put these players at honorable mention because I'm not really directly comparing them against the other competitors we'll see on here. I think for these players, it's a little bit too early to really give them a concrete ranking on here. These 9 players definitely have potential to rank pretty high on this pyramid. As a matter of fact, I think most of them will rank pretty high on here by the end of their career. We'll just have to let time tell. At tier 4, this is where we actually start this pyramid. On tier 4, we have James Harden, Steph Curry, Dirk Nowitzki, Allen Iverson, Carmelo Anthony, Dominique Wilkins, Shaq, Moses Malone, and Julius Erving. And you could probably throw other names on here like Larry Bird, Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, Adrian Dantley, and George Gervin. These players represent the first threshold of historically elite scorers. All of them have proven to be high-end scorers in the league for at least a decade or so. Truly memorable offensive players. Now, at tier 3 is where we really start getting specific about individuals. Tier 3 represents the truly historic scorers of the league, the guys that are above the players we just talked about, the best of the best. And tier 3 is composed of 4 players: Kobe Bryant, Karl Malone, Wilt Chamberlain, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, up until LeBron James, was the all-time leading scorer in the NBA. The man was the most unstoppable force down low offensively. Kareem was the only player in NBA history to truly master the skyhook, which is widely considered the most unguardable shot. He's the pinnacle of scoring longevity. Now, you know Wilt Chamberlain is a good scorer when people don't even believe to this day that his 100-point game ever happened. The man was a statistical anomaly. His scoring stats literally looked like my career games. Despite me talking about how playing in a faster paced era inflates his numbers, playing north of 45 minutes a game for the majority of your career and averaging 30 plus points a game is out of this world impressive. Karl Malone is a man that's very slept on in the topic of scoring. He has more career points than anyone in NBA history, unless your name is LeBron or Kareem. He averaged 25 points a game for 19 seasons, from 1985 to 1998. In Malone's first 13 seasons, do you want to guess how many games he missed in that stretch? Maybe around 60 or 50, that seems realistic. No, he missed only 5 games. The consistency from Malone was unreal. And finally, we have Kobe Bryant, who is just an assassin out on the court. In terms of scoring, Kobe really had no weakness. He can shoot the long ball, he definitely could shoot the midi, he could shoot near the rim, he could take you off the dribble, he could catch and shoot, he could post you up. There wasn't a way he couldn't score on you. And what sucks even more for his opponents is that he did this pretty consistently for a 2-decade-long career. Now, moving on to tier 2, we have 2 players. 2 of the 3 most terrorizing bucket getters of all time, LeBron James and Kevin Durant. I might be breaking the pyramid rules a little bit here, but I would probably rank LeBron James as my second greatest scorer of all time, slightly over KD. I mean, what hasn't there already been said about LeBron James? 21 seasons of averaging 27 a night, still averaging 25 points a game to this day. You see, LeBron James hasn't had any individual scoring seasons that blow you away like Wilt Chamberlain in 1962 or Kobe in 2006 or Harden in 2019. LeBron hasn't had any historical standout games like Wilt's 100-point game and Kobe's 81-point game. But the sheer consistency and tenacity of LeBron's scoring over his whole career rightly lands him in tier 2. And Kevin Durant, who is pretty much just like Kobe but 5 inches taller. I mean, once this guy gets into his hezzy pull-up, there's quite literally nothing you can do about it. I mean, if 7'5", freakishly athletic Victor Wembanyama can't even stop it, then what's the point of even trying for the 99.9% of hoopers? KD, similar to LeBron, has shown out-of-this-world consistency, still averaging 30 a game in season 16. But to really think that there's a player that's somehow a better scorer than both LeBron James and Kevin Durant, it would be impossible. Who on planet Earth could ever think of a better scorer? Well, I can. It's Michael Jordan, lonely at the top of the pyramid. You know you're the best scorer of all time when you've played twice as many seasons where you've led the league than you haven't led the league. And Michael Jordan struck fear into his opponents' souls when they were playing defense. Michael Jordan was an offensive force that the league couldn't even fathom at the time. The all-time leader in points per game, playoff points per game, has the highest scoring prime in modern NBA history, and leads the NBA in per 100 possession points per game of any player that's played at least a decade. I hope you guys enjoyed this video.